Hello, all, Isos here. This is a lot quicker than I normally get around to these, but I had most of the information already written up because this normally comes up in the assumptions. So today I am talking about cards versus resources. So normally I would equate a card to a resource and always say that it's not strictly true and that there's some level that cards are actually more valuable than a resource. Today, I'm actually tackling that topic as to quantifying how much. I'll mostly be focusing on the actual resource value of a card, based off like double resource and triple resource, and just the resource card type in general. So we'll go into that, but there will be a little bit at the end about um, the stuff I've been talking about previously regarding curves and like cards being above value, etc., and how that impacts the effect of a card. But that'll only be a little bit brief towards the end of this. But anyway, I'm just going to get started with this. So we'll start, as I always do, with the assumptions and definitions. Normally I don't need definitions, but I need a couple here, so we'll just stick with that. So I'm still sticking with 2 fort equals 3 damage equals 3 healing equals 2 resources. I'm pretty sure damage and healing are equivalent still. And the more I work with these values, the more they just seem to fit. So I'm fairly certain these are the expected curve of what each of these effects would be, and they are the most common effects. So yeah, that's what I'm working with. And obviously not every card follows this, like Haymaker costs effectively 3 resources and does 3 damage. That's because some cards are below curve, on curve, or above curve. Once again, there's a bit on the end about that. Power of cards will be discussed at one point, but I'm not going to be considering them for the actual case studies. So once I start getting to individual characters, I'm not going to be looking to the power of cards because they're way too deck dependent. It's really dependent on what cards you're running in your deck, like how many 2 cost of the aspects of that you are playing cards do you actually have. So I can't talk about them independently of a particular deck, and because of that, it makes it just too difficult to talk about them in my cases. But I will talk about them before we get to that. And I'm not considering encounter cards that you get from shuffling your deck, because that it's impossible to pin down how much an encounter card is going to cost you, because it's both board state reliant, it's scenario dependent, it's modular dependent, it's whether you're expert or standard dependent, and there's just too many effects there to really narrow down exactly how much each one's going to cost you, and some of them end up dealing with effects that aren't things that you can really equate to one of the resources that you deal with them with. So I just don't think it's reasonable to work out the cost of an additional encounter card. And typically speaking, if you are powering through, like if you're generating more value, you should feel those encounter cards less, because that's how the villain generates value, and you're going to be outpacing that if you're generating value efficiently. Hopefully. It obviously, difficult scenario down the line might change that, but it might be able to outpace you, and then yeah, you've got to try and look into more efficient decks and whatnot. But we're not there yet, and that's what you would have to do at that point. Anyway, so I'm just going to go into the definitions quickly. So we've got intrinsic versus acquired value. So intrinsic value is the term that I'm using for the value a card has just naturally. So you don't have to do anything, you don't have to work for this, it's just the value that it has. And it will always have that value. So I'm using this to refer to the resources of the card. So like most cards have a 1 resource icon on them. The Energy, Genius, Strength have 2. The Power ofs have 1 and a bit, effectively, up to a potential 2. And there are other resource cards that have more, but you don't have to work for it. You don't even have to you don't have to sort out your hand and find out how you're going to pay for something. That's not considered when it comes to intrinsic value. I'm just talking about the resources it generates, and those ones will have some fairly hard numbers. Like hard as in not difficult, but hard as in they are set. We'll be able to get some actual values there. Acquired value is going to be a bit more nebulous, but it's the value you gain or lose by playing them. But that'll be the later section about that'll be a later section that we'll get to after we've already worked out the intrinsic value. And I'm going to be referring to the Energy, Genius, and Strength cards as EGS. I basically consider them 1 card, just max 1 per, so that you don't, so they can have them different named for thematic reasons, and to stop you from, putting three copies of the double physical in, which theoretically you could do if it was all named the same thing. But double resource basic cards is just a mouthful, so I'm just going to be calling them EGS going forward, at least in this video. So, intrinsic value. We're starting with intrinsic value. It's just the value that each card you draw brings you closer to the next multi-resource card, so they have an average value that's slightly higher than 1. Because there's a double resource card, there's triple resource cards, there's some number of multi-resource cards in your deck currently. I don't think there's much reason to cut those cards just yet. So I think most people would, and I think most people would agree with this. You just put in the one of each of the double resource cards in almost all cases. So I'm going to start with a standard hero. So just like this when I'm saying standard hero, I'm talking about someone that's they have no additional double or triple resource cards. They're probably 6/5, but don't necessarily have to be 6. When I say 6/5, a 6 hand size in alter ego, 5 in hero. There's nothing directly impacting the value of the intrinsic value of a card in their deck. So if you didn't put EGS in, you would obviously have an average value of 1, because every other card has a value of 1. I suppose you would have to remove the power ofs as well, but let's just say you've done that. You would have an intrinsic average value of 1 card would be 1 resource. You would then be able to just apply that assumption that I've been doing for ages about 1 card being 1 resource. But why would you do that when you can increase it? So if you go with EGS, you start having 43 resources across 40 cards. This means an average resource per card of 1.075. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it adds up. So this is 7.5%. It's if you drew 40 cards, it would add up to 3. It's something like 13 cards or something. Get you an extra resource. So that's every 2-3 turns. Assuming a 40 card deck. But yeah, so every 2-3 turns you get an extra resource for nothing, just for having these cards in your deck and running at 40 cards. That seems pretty good to me. Now, if you thin your deck though, so if I had 10 cards in play, there's now only 30 cards in my deck, and there's now 33 resources in my deck because I haven't removed the double resource cards. So that means I'm now up to 1.1 instead of 1.075. So that means all of a sudden, every 10 cards, I'm expecting a double resource. Like, expecting doesn't, like, you won't always get it on exactly 10 cards. Not like that 10th card is guaranteed to be it. RNG messes with this, but the messes with that at least. But if you took enough draws, you would get one every 10 cards or so. If you drew an infinite number of cards. So in this case, you've actually increased it. It's only increased it by a little bit, but now you're getting it every second turn, effectively, like, on average. And that's just thinning your deck by 10 cards. Like, it's not like nothing. That's a decent number of cards to have in play, but it's not huge either. Like, Iron Man will have at least 6, by end game, will have at least 6 tech cards in play, plus you're going to have your Stark Tower, your Pepper Pots, and then just like 2 cards from your aspect, and all of a sudden you've thinned your deck by 10 cards. That's to say nothing of Iron Man's ability to reuse the double resources with the Pepper Pots. But I figured I'd also touch on running a larger deck here quickly, because I know people do it, and it pains me whenever I see a deck that does that when I'm looking at something that I thought would be interesting, because I have a fairly wide background in card games. Shocking, I know. And like, I know the reason people do it is like, oh, I'm only losing 1 or 2%, but you're losing 1 or 2% on every card draw. And if you draw like 50 cards, you've lost that 1 or 2% on every card, and now you've lost 100% or something. And it adds up. And this is a co-op card game. You can do what you want, but I'm just going to point out, in this case, for the intrinsic value, on a standard hero, you're running your EGS, and you've got 50 cards. You actually lower your average value down to 1.06. Now, that may not seem like a big loss, like it's only 1.5% loss. 2.4% benefit from running the EGS cards overall. So you've gone from like 100% down to like 97.6. But it actually increases your expectation to draw a double resource card from 2 to 3 turns with a 5-card hand to 3 to 4 turns. You've basically added a turn where you don't have this double resource. So there's one turn where you can't get that additional value from having the double resource to pay for those cards to do a bigger play. And you're going to feel that. That's one additional turn. If you're if the game runs for like, let's say a game runs for 10 turns, a 40 card deck will be able to get that additional resource and use that additional resource to generate more value or even value, whatever, or whatever they need. They're going to get it between 3 and 5 times. The 50 card deck is going to get it between 2 and 3 times. They're going to get it a whole lot less than the 40 card variant would. It's why it's generally best to just run 40 cards. It's why most people run 40 cards. But this is just another aspect of, if you're looking for a reason why you want to trim down to 40, this is part of that. And obviously I'm taking the two extremes. This is the minimum and the maximum. But it's a linear scale between the two. So just imagine if you're at 45, you're going to be like halfway between these two extremes. 41 is like 10%. So yeah, it's not a lot, but it's not a lot number-wise, but it adds up really quickly. So anyway, that's a standard hero. So basically the thing to remember here is that putting the EGS cards in means that your resources are actually slightly higher than your cards. Like your card is worth slightly more than your resources, so that you'll, like, if you draw a card, you will get slightly more resources over time, rather than generating the resource directly. But now I'm just going to quickly touch on the power of cards, because they are important. They're basically more double resource cards. The thing is, they're a percentage of the power of the normal double resource cards. So their max value in a 40 card deck is the same as adding a single EGS card, right? So this 0.075 here is generated by all three of the EGS cards. Each one is worth 0.025, and you get that 0.025 using the power of, if all 40 cards in your deck were from the aspect and had a 2 or higher cost. That is not currently possible. We can because that is the upper limit is the same as the EGS's just base value. I would always include EGS first. So I would say that the current max value, so we're including both power ofs and EGS, is about half that, because you could have 20 cards and then 20 cards, these 5, and your 15 from your hero set. So you got at best half of that. But the true value is actually dependent on your deck, which is part of why I'm not going to be talking about these when we get to the actual cases. So you should be comparing how many cards are in your deck that actually meet this requirement, and work out the portion versus how many cards are in the deck overall. And once you know that portion, you can work out how much these cards are actually worth. So for instance, the 0.125 value, that's the 50-50. So that means 20 cards in your deck can meet the requirements of being 2+ cost and having a aspect that matches the power of. If you have, say, 4 cards that do it, you would be down to 0.0025, i.e. 0.25%, as opposed to the 2.5% you would get from a EGS card. So the important things to remember here is that they're always a lower number of resources. You'll likely want to consider EGS cards before you start considering power of. There is the possibility in the future there might be a reason you would want to go the other way. It would have to be triggered. That idea would have to be triggered based off the fact that these are wild resources, instead of the EGS's set for each of their values. But currently, I would just consider you put your EGS in before you start even looking at power of cards. Okay, now we're getting to actual characters. So there are 3 characters that all have resource cards that have additional resources on them. So we're going to cover each of those in turn and just how it impacts their builds. So Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel has 2 cards that are triples and then can have EGS on top of that. So the triples add 2 additional over a normal card each, meaning the total is 47. You can have 47 resources in a 40 card deck. So this equates to about a resource density of about 1.175. Shockingly, it's 0.1 higher, but considering you just added 4 and there are 4 additional resources, resource icons, and each resource icon's worth 2.5. Makes sense that that'd be 10%. So yeah, this is a pretty substantial increase. This is over double the increase you get just from having EGS versus not having EGS. So that can be a pretty big deal. But the other thing is Captain Marvel actually has, in her hero set, 3 ways to interact with these 2. It's why she often feels quite powerful, despite the fact most of her cards are actually just on curve. You're not actually getting above curve cards with Captain Marvel for the most part. They're actually just kind of baseline, but her resources are higher. And because her resources are higher, she feels powerful because she can generate more resources than other characters, so she gets more of effects. So that's, yeah, it's part of her design. It's really good design, honestly. I quite like Captain Marvel overall. She's not my favorite character, but the design with the resources and how it all interacts to make her feel powerful is just on point. So anyway, the 3 main ways that I want to talk about. Commander increases the value because you've increased the value of how much a draw is worth. Commander giving it to yourself will often be more useful because you're generating more resources, but it's not always the case. Other characters have they might not have the resources, but they might have cards that are higher value, so you might want to give it to them. But especially in solo, you would give it to yourself, and you're getting more value out of that resource-wise than most characters would. So if someone just needs if you're just giving it out to give someone a resource, it's best to go onto yourself. You're more likely to get more out of it because it's pushing you towards your next 2 or 3 resource card. Channel. I believe it's called Channel. The hero power. We can actually just flick up and check. Rechannel. My bad. This should be Rechannel. Anyway, this one I find is super interesting because once you actually get the card in hand, it's no longer worth 1.175. It's now worth whatever it actually drew. It's like the waveform's collapsing. It's put you closer to your next 2 or closer to your next 3, but that particular card is only worth if you're putting it into Rechannel, it'll only be worth 1. You would normally not throw 2 resources into this hero power. It's generally a waste. You just spend that on something else and then use something else to trigger this. So you spend 1 resource from hand, so you're only losing a resource, and you're generating 1.175. Worst case, you've got no cards in play. You're just trying to generate a resource. Took a damage somehow. It's like turn 1 or something. And you're also getting a heal, which is about 0.66. It's a 2/3 of a resource. So you're actually getting something like 775, a little bit higher. I forgot the other 6s. 7.8, right? It'd be about that. Say 0.8. Probably safe to just say 0.8, rather than trying to be fancy with it. It's a little low on what hero powers generally generate, but it is just straight value, and deck thinning could increase the number of that 1.175 to something a little bit higher, and then you end up getting more value. But it's not strictly necessary. It's already that's already pretty good. Like, you're generating more value than you thought than you were with just that heal. You're not just losing a card, gaining a card, and getting a heal. You're pushing yourself closer to that next multi-resource card. It's so you're actually getting value out of that. Then the Alpha Flight Station. The Alpha Flight Station is just this last effect, but potentially in Alter Ego, just a silly amount of it. Like, lose one card, generate two. So in Alter Ego, so you'd lose your one. So you've lost one, you've spent one, and then you gain like 2.3, I think, 2.35. So you've gained like 1.35. It's and that's like every turn you're in Alter Ego, and if you're not in Alter Ego, you can still get this 0.175 value out of it. It's a really good card. It'll pay for itself in like 2 Alter Ego triggers, and or a ton of hero triggers, but yeah, 2 Alter Ego triggers will probably be the easiest way to pay for it. I didn't put a note here because it's the same. It's the same basic idea as Rechannel. Yeah, so Captain Marvel, because her deck just has all this cycling, and even the Photonic Blast is another card that can do it. I just didn't put it here because it's an event. It's not something that consistently lets you do it. It only does it each time you play that card. So Captain Marvel is just constantly going to be cycling her deck, and she's gaining this little bit of value. This is not a large number. This 0.175 is not a large number, but she's going to gain it every time she draws a card. Over just getting a resource instead, and it adds up. Like, you don't even need 10 of these. It's like somewhere between 5 and 6. Somewhere between 5 and 6 of these just random draws, and you've gained a whole resource. These random like cycle one card effects, and that's a big deal. Like, that is what makes Captain Marvel work so well. So that's enough on Captain Marvel. Let's go on to the next one. Black Panther. I didn't think anyone would be surprised by this. He has Vibranium, so of course I'm going to talk about him. And it makes sense to cover the core set ones first. So anyway, EGS with Black Panther, 46 resources in 40 cards. This creates a resource density of about 1.15. Also creates one of his biggest problems in that he has more resource cards in his deck than he has hand size in hero form, so you can end up in the situation where you can't play anything, which is unfortunate, but it's unlikely. So the only draw he has in his hero set is Golden City. Requires Alter Ego, so it's relatively limited. Alter Ego has a cost to go to because they're going to scheme against you, and that's generally more expensive than the damage they would have dealt. We'll get to that at some point. So he's not like Captain Marvel. He's not generating value by drawing cards and getting this tiny value constantly. He has to do it another way, and his way is because he has just a large number of supports and upgrades. If you play every card in his hero set, he only has 9 cards left. 5 of them are Wakanda Forever, 3 of them are Vibranium, and 1 copy of Ancestral Recall. And obviously, Wakanda Forever is super high value. So this can get really strong if you can get down to this number. So you can thin your deck to a really insane degree. You could, if you were just running EGS and a bunch of cards that you could remain in play, just keep in play permanently, you would actually get to like a resource density of 1.5. You wouldn't be in the best spot though, because none of the cards that you have to play would actually cost 2. Sorry about that. They would all cost 1. So you would need some cards on the table that allowed you to soak up these resources, and you would probably want some cards to generate resources on the table to play for your Wakanda Forevers and Ancestral Recalls. And like you could set up a deck like that. Not yet, I don't think. There's some limiting factors in the card pool. It's hard to get value out of all the cards that stay in play currently. But like long term, this is potentially a fairly viable strategy to get him down to just nothing left in his deck. We'll see if it gets there. I would assume so. But deck thinning gets him that value, because all of a sudden his natural draw. So 1.15 with his natural draw is only going to be what, like half a card. Half a card a turn. 7.75 with 5 cards, like 5.75 with 5 card draw. Whereas if you get that up to the full 1.5, you're going to be getting your 7.5, like going from like half a card a turn to like 2.5. Just of value, it would be big. But we're not quite there yet. We'll see where it goes. But you'll notice that you built, like, that's a big board, and it does give you a lot of value. Whereas Captain Marvel doesn't have as many cards that would remain in play, and has all these strong draw mechanics. So it would be better to not build such a ridiculous board with Captain Marvel, whereas Black Panther could afford it. Could afford to do it, and that could be his way of utilizing his double resource cards. Whereas Hulk, which is the next character, the only other character that doesn't... Hulk is the only other character that has a multi-resource card in his deck. So I'm just going to quickly touch on him. He is relatively new, so I'm sure not everyone has played him yet. But he has the same resource density as Captain Marvel. He has 2 copies of a free resource. It's hero form only, which is a little bit of a drawback, but not huge. You normally want to go into hero form in Marvel Champions, just in general. But his draw potential is significantly lower. He has a couple of events that allow him to draw. The Ready event, if you play for it with full physical, gets you a card. But that's not consistently available. Similar reason, I didn't talk too much about Captain Marvel's Photon Blast. His only other draw potential, he has something similar to Alpha Flight Station, except it's only 1-for-1. It's his alter ego ability. It's his only positive ID ability. It's not like Captain Marvel. You're not generating like up to 4 additional cards a turn to get more value out of them. You're generating at most just the additional value from 1. He also has an alternate resource in the lab, in Alter Ego. It's the only alternate resource he has. It's not like Black Panther with his Golden City, drawing 2 cards every time he flips to Alter Ego. It's just 1 mental resource a turn, and only when you go into Alter Ego. Deck thinning is always an option, and it's an option here. He's just not very good at it. He's only got 2 cards in his hero set that actually stay in play. It's all cards, they're almost all events. There's the 1 upgrade that leaves play if he swaps to Alter Ego. But the only cards that permanently stay in play in his hero set are lab and immovable objects. So you're going to be stuck with a lot of his cards, which you wouldn't think would be that bad of a thing, but he has some resource issues, which I'm about to go into here. So these numbers, 4.7 and 5.875, these are the values if you times the value of a card draw by the number of cards he draws in a turn. So 4.7 is less than the 5 that most heroes have in their hero form, and 5.875 is less than the 6 most people have in their alter ego form. It's a 12.5% and 9% drop respectively, roughly. So he's actually, despite having a higher resource density, because he has less draw, he's actually getting less resources than a character with just like a baseline hand limit of 6 and 5. Not even running, you don't even have to run EGS to get a better resource engine than Hulk. Like, that is kind of ludicrous. He can't deck thin very well. He has no draw potential in his hero set, meaning you have to go into the expensive options for draw in aspects basic, like Avengers Tower is not Avengers Tower, Avengers Mansion is expensive, and strength in numbers is kind of conditional, and those are like the only draw effects we have currently. So it's a bit of a problem. And to top this all off, his hero set is kind of expensive. They're pretty much all cost free. Not all cost free. There's like the ready is 2. There's an attack that costs 1. But because of this, you end up in this situation, and the attack that costs 1 can only be paid for with physical. You actually end up in a situation where you actually potentially waste a lot of your cards, or a lot of your resources. They just can't be used because you're holding a hand of like all 3 cost cards, and so you can only play 1 of them, and then you can't use your resources on the table because you just don't happen to have 3 of them to play a second one, or 4 or whatever you need to actually play a second card. So you end up wasting a lot of resources that way. And then on top of it, his hero cards aren't generating insane value for the most part. The exception is Hulk Smash. That is actually generating a fairly insane value. That is the one card that is really over the curve for him. Most of them are fairly situational. So you end up with this character that just can't generate an effect, and is constantly falling further and further behind on resources because of his own ability or lack thereof, his own ability and his reduced hand size, and I've not really been enjoying it, but it's something that you can work with. Like, there are ways you can work with it, just not with the current card pool, I don't think. Like, if we get more options for drawing cards, anything that draws you cards is going to have it's for the same reason it had a higher value in Captain Marvel, have a higher value here. Strength in numbers is particularly good with him. He'll generate so much resources off of that and be able to actually afford his cards all of a sudden. But the until we have cards like that, we're kind of stuck in this weird spot where he just can't do what he needs to. In multiplayer, you could make sure to give him your mansion every turn, like everyone gives them their mansions every turn because he'll get more value out of them. But it's so greedy. I'd really rather just play a normal character and avoid people having to feed me their mansions every turn to justify my own character choice. But that's a group decision, right? You could, your group might enjoy that, having you swinging for some pretty high values from time to time. But yeah, that's where I'm currently at with Hulk, resource-wise, particularly intrinsic value-wise. He's got a high intrinsic value, he just can't utilize it. So we're kind of stuck there. But now that we've talked about intrinsic value, I'm going to talk about acquired value. I kind of touched on this a little bit already with the Hulk, with the mentioning Hulk Smash. But acquired value is the value you acquire when you play the card. Or do something else with the card, right? It's not something that is inherently valuable, inherently part of the card. So the important thing here is it will never fall below 1. It'll never fall below 1 resource for a card because every card has a resource printed on it. So you can only increase it, so your average is always going to be higher than 1. Now, as I mentioned before at the start of this video, this is a little nebulous. You're not, I don't think you can realistically pin this down to a hard and fast number that will let you determine the exact value of a draw in the current board state, in your current deck, etc. I think there's always going to be a little bit of wiggle room. But I'm just going to go into the basics of it, basics of working out what you need to do here to try and add it to your considerations when you're considering cards versus resources. So to start with, cards that are below the curve, so things like Haymaker, Resourceful, To the Rescue, which are definitely not great, but they're basic options for things that they're basic equivalents of cards that you don't already that you would only take if you didn't have a better option in aspect. They can always be used as their one resource. So you want to be careful when including them in their deck because you need to have a use case for them to justify ever actually playing that card. But their actual value is is always there to be spent. So the reason you would include them is things like so Haymaker you include because you can't deal damage and you need to kill a minion, so you're getting the value off of reducing the damage or fraught or whatever that the minion was going to do, or maybe it's enough damage to win you the game, in which case, congrats, you just won. And it doesn't matter how much that it was below the curve that this card you played, because you've generated the level of value you needed to win. So yeah, that's Haymaker. To the Rescue has a similar case with threat removal. Like, you can remove a side scheme and that side scheme can have a lot more value, or you can remove a threat from the main scheme such that you're not in as dangerous a position anymore. And the last thing resourceful's the case I really want to talk about, because it pretty much always has a use case, in that it can always reduce the amount of waste you have. So the Hulk, I said before, often has waste on his cards because he's got quite high costs with his cards. if you're including resourceful, if you happen to have 2 cards in hand and one of them is like 4 cost or something and you can't play it, you can, and the other one is resourceful, you can play the resourceful, and instead of losing two cards of value like you were going to, you've only lost 1. That is its use case, and it also has a wild icon, which makes it quite versatile for meeting kickers if you have to. It makes a lot of sense that it's in the Hulk deck with all the physical kickers that he has. But this is what I'm talking about with use cases. They have values that are below what you would expect for the cost, but there is some point where there is some reason you've included them that makes them better than just playing another card instead. Like, so you can't play another card, you can play another card, but it doesn't do what you need it to, so you've taken this less efficient option because it does what you actually need. And there could be other reasons, but you just got to, when you are including a below curve card, just really think about what you're doing on that card. There's probably a better option that does something else, but is probably better for your deck. But I'm not here to tell you how to have fun with this game. If you want to run a below curve card, you're welcome to. But there are also just times when you can make these below curve cards just a lot more valuable. Sometimes they're combo pieces for a combo that's quite strong. Yeah, maybe that's why it's there. So anyway, we'll go on to the next one. Cards that are on curve. Card that's on curved, whether it's played or spent, it's on curve. It's still generating the same amount of value. So you play it, you generate X value of whatever its effect is. If you don't play it, you generate that X value in the fact that it's a resource. These don't actually have any impact on your acquired value of your deck because you've already considered the fact that it's in part of its intrinsic value, which is that it's a resource. And its intrinsic value is the same as its acquired value. So playing the card doesn't give you any value, it doesn't gain you value. So it has no additional impact on what your total value of your deck is if you try and calculate it. Cards that are above the curve, though, they do have value outside of just the intrinsic value. So these cards, you gain value by playing them. So, for instance, Webkick. Webkick costs 3 resources, 1 card, 4 resources, effectively 4 resources. And it gets you 8 damage. For 4 resources, you expect 6 damage. So it's generated 2 damage, which is about 1 and a third resources of value. So anytime you play a web kick, you've generated 1 and a third resources, effectively. So they shouldn't be spent unless you get full value from them, or at least reasonable value from them. So like web kicking something that has 6 hit points is still fine. You're not losing value from that. You're not losing value versus just spending the card as a resource. But you really just need to think about whether it's pushing the game plan forward. They should be used as often as possible, particularly if they're really high above curve, because you just generating additional value than what you're putting in is putting you further and further ahead and putting you closer and closer to the win condition that you need to generate. So what you could do is work out how much above the curve and the chance that you'll play each card that is above the curve. So web kick, for instance, let's say I have a 50-50 chance that I'm going to play a web kick on any given turn that I draw it. It generates 1.3 resources of value. There's 3 of them in the deck. So that would mean that it generates about the 4 resources of value, and I expect to play them 50% of the time, so we drop that down to 2. We know that 1 resource in a 40 card deck is about a 0.025 additional value across the whole deck, and all of a sudden we have, extra 5% that you can add in to your intrinsic value to make your Spider-Man look slightly better versus card versus resource. So this is why even if you don't have the EGS cards, your the card is still worth more than a resource, because there are these cards that generate more. They're generally hero cards that generate more value than they cost. So yeah, in that case, Spider-Man, web kick, 50% chance you're going to play it, and it's the 3 of them are effectively equivalent to 2 double resource cards. Just obviously generating different things. This is damage versus the resources that you needed to play them, and if you combine them all together, you can up that value higher and higher, and as you up that value higher and higher, your deck becomes more and more powerful, and as your deck becomes more and more powerful, you obviously start winning games easier and can outpace the villains and encounter shenanigans more and more. And the flip side of that is you can also gain value from your playstyle and whatnot, but that is just that's what you're thinking. That's what you're thinking about in the heat of the moment. It's not really something that you can put a number on, I don't think, most of the time, unless you're considering only one particular scenario and going from there. But anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about the acquired value. So we're actually just finishing up now. So this is just me rambling about the cards versus resources, them actually being worth more than 1. But it's really just a draw is worth more than 1. A card in hand is worth whatever the value it says on it, whether that's the resource value on it or the effect on it generating some level of value. So yeah, that is it for this. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or reach out to me on Discord, or generally speaking, Discord is where most people reach me. Thanks for watching.